carriers to present to Silicon Valley what they need. We say, listen, that's great that we pitch you all year round, but what do you guys want? It's time for you to come and tell the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs what your gaps are, where you need to find innovation and engineering to bring in your company, and where you're seeking partnerships. That kind of information is essential for us here in Silicon Valley to tune our startups and tune our businesses towards where we might find a willing market. Now, we always put the caveat in, we know that there's a lot of good businesses that go over the top. There's a lot of successful businesses that want to work around carriers. And I think that's a great business model. But obviously the focus here, and certainly at TC3, are those business models where carriers are a significant part of it. And I always comment that I absolutely admire companies that go around. That's free legal business and is good. However, carriers have this unique characteristic that makes them highly valuable. And I want to try a few. I'd say the first one is, that's where the money is. That's the old bank robber Willie Horton, was it? Why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, why do you work with carriers? They're the people putting out an invoice once a month and pulling in the US $45 ARPUs. They have a lot of money, and they spend that money to make the industry work. They spend it on networking equipment, they spend it on content services, they spend it on messaging infrastructure, on VoLTE infrastructure to enable the next generation of voice, rich content services. So they've gathered up the funds and they disperse them to make their networks better. And that makes them an extremely significant player. And I think extreme important point number two is, that's where the customers are. So if you're trying to get to the customers, you can go over the top around the carrier and you go direct to customer with an app or service, but that puts all the marketing distribution effort on you. So you now need to go around the world and tell a customer in China or India, Australia, France, why they should be using your content service. If you're lucky enough to have tremendous word of mouth, you do nothing and that happens by itself. But for the majority of us, that requires a tremendous investment in marketing. And a partnership with a carrier can reduce that investment a significant deal. So if you're successful and lucky to get a partnership with a carrier, they can take you to those customers in that market. They can co-promote and co-market that with you. And if we're talking about a multinational carrier, of course they can distribute that application, service, or content into multiple markets. It's an extremely powerful multiplier for your businesses. So those are the two main attractions that we see. Now, then we ask the carriers to tell Silicon Valley what they need. We also ask them to kind of put it into a brief slide so that in one slide or possibly two, we can understand what their needs are. And by doing that to all of our speakers at TC3, it creates two things. One, you're going to see from, yesterday we saw China Mobile slide. You're going to see from China Mobile what their needs are. And that's valuable. They identified, as an example, voice over LTE as one of their needs. So that's great. Now you know if you have a VoLTE solution, China Mobile is looking, you can do triage and work with them. But what's also extremely interesting is when you put all these one slide from each carrier in aggregate, you start to see where the industry is moving. And you see what the telecom industry in total is looking for. And that's powerful information if you are a venture capitalist, if you're a startup, if you're somebody who's a press or analyst trying to see where is everything going. When you see VoLTE show up on every carrier slide, you know that this is rising to the top of importance for the global carrier community. We'll see if VoLTE does that or not through the course of the day. So we'll have all these carriers come up, each one will present a slide, and because we found that so powerful, inside your programs, we've already aggregated those slides, so you can see them called up and put together already. So that's that valuable piece of information. That's one of the things we're going to feature the carriers. The other thing is I'm going to have a conversation with each one of them, interview them and try to talk to them about the programs and services they have. So the mechanisms they have for interacting with Silicon Valley, the tools they use, so developer programs, local facilities, incubators, all these things that help them funnel innovation into their actual live customer-facing networks. So I'll have discussions about that with each of the carriers. So one of the things I'm going to do is review some of the things that came up last year. Last year's priorities, and I won't go on for too long about this, I'll just kind of give it to you as a list. But last year, things that came up as top priorities from the carriers were offloading technologies, LTE in general. Every carrier had something about cloud on their slide last year. But it was funny, it was different. It was hybrid cloud, or cloud security, or virtual cloud. So everybody was looking at cloud innovations, but looking for a specific part of cloud innovations that was slightly different. Digital home came up a few times. Multi-mode, multi-band equipment came up. So as we talked yesterday about how the spectrum landscape is getting more and more complicated. Bands are getting licensed in various slices up and down the spectrum chart. Multi-mode and multi-band radios inside of devices and phones are becoming more and more important. A machine-to-machine came up a fair bit last year. I imagine we'll see that as well this year, but the acronym will change to IoT, because that's the trend. Big data came up a lot last year. A couple of people mentioned it as analytics, a couple of people mentioned it as big data, but it was one of the things that frequently came up. Connected car came up a couple of times. Bring your own device came up a couple of times, and mobile health came up a couple of times. So those are what we see last year. Now, I expect we'll see a lot of return highlights on the charts, because the reality is we don't solve all these problems in 1 year. So it'll be interesting to though see what's new and what's different from last year. So with that, that's kind of my introduction, my summary of last year's, and I'm kind of eager to see what comes up this year. You can open your books and get a sneak preview, but I think it'll be more interesting to hear it straight from the carriers themselves. So with that, I'm going to get into this right away. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to invite up some of our keynote guests from Sprint.